Lucas was born on the 23rd of August 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. He was born in a small log cabin which comprised of one lone room. He had a half-brother and sister that had a part in his life, but there were said to be up to 9 siblings belonging to either one parent. Lucas was born to parents Nellie Viola Lucas and Anderson Lucas. His dad worked on the rail and was a raging alcoholic, a habit which began after a horrific accident on the railway left him with no legs. While his mother was a violent prostitute who often beat her disabled husband and children. It was said that Lucas was attacked by his mother so severely one time that he spent 3 days in a coma. When he was just 10 years old, Lucas hurt his eye in a particularly brutal fight with his brother, which involved a knife, an injury that his mother ignored, and eventually it led to Lucas needing a glass eye. Lucas's father died when he was just 14 years old. His father went outside in the depths of winter and stayed out until he eventually died of pneumonia. When he was a young teenager, Lucas became interested in death and used animals to kill to sate his bubbling feelings. This is a common known factor for the start of many serial killers. In 1951, Lucas is said to have progressed on from killing animals to humans and confessed to the killing of a young woman who apparently refused to have sex with him. But he recanted this statement as fabrication, a theme which was common for this killer. He was a known liar. In 1954, Lucas was arrested by the police for a string of local robberies that had taken place in the Richmond area in Virginia. He was given a 6-year jail term. He miraculously escaped prison, only to be recaptured quite quickly and forced to serve the remainder of his time until his release in September of 1959. After his release, Lucas found home with his half-sister by the name of Opal in Michigan. He was engaged to a lady who he went to introduce to his mother, hoping for her approval. But to his disappointment, his mother hated his wife-to-be and tried to force her son to move away from his new wife and live with her back in Virginia. The arguments between mother and son continued, and in January 1960, these arguments took a more sinister turn. On the 11th of that month, his mother was said to have hit Lucas repeatedly over the head. Lucas snapped. He hit her at first, then when she was on the floor barely conscious, he proceeded to stab her. She was still alive, laying in a pool of blood, when Opal returned to the home. She called for help, and Viola was taken to hospital, where she later died of a heart attack. Police were now hunting Lucas for matricide. But instead of being caught, he managed to get to Ohio. But his freedom was not long-lived, and he was arrested. When he was taken into custody for his own mother's murder, Lucas said, "All I remember was slapping her alongside the neck. But after I did, I saw her fall and decided to grab her. But she fell to the floor, and when I went to pick her up, I noticed a knife in my hand and that she had been cut." Lucas claimed this was an act of self-defense, but this plea was not accepted by the courts, and he was sentenced to a 20 to 40-year prison term in Michigan for the second-degree murder of his mother. It was reported that Lucas attempted to take his life more than once and was removed from Jackson State Penitentiary and moved to Ionia State Mental Hospital. After serving only a paltry 10 years for murder, Lucas was released due to a prison overcrowding in June of 1970. With no fixed address, Lucas was a known drifter. He relied solely on family help. He eventually found a fixed address, again This was a prison one. He was convicted in 1971 of attempting to abduct 3 girls. He was given another 5-year prison term. Surely this should have been the final straw. He should have remained in prison for the rest of his life, knowing that this man always seemed to stray back to criminal life. While he was in prison, he had a pen pal who was a single mother. They wrote frequently, and on his release in 1975, the pair married. But 2 years after the nuptials, he left due to accusations of abuse from his new wife's daughter. Again, with no home, he drifted and made friends with a man by the name of Otis Toole. The pair moved in together, and Lucas found dribs and drabs of cash work as a roofer and a mechanic. He entered into a relationship with a young girl by the name of Frida Powell, who herself was no stranger to trouble and had recently escaped from a juvenile centre that she had been kept in. Otis and Lucas shared many interests, most of which were criminal, and both spoke openly about their fascination with death. When Powell's grandmother died, she was to be taken into state care, but Lucas convinced her to leave and go with Otis and him to travel the country. She agreed to what she thought would be a better life, and they managed to get to California, and a job fell into Lucas's lap. He was to care for an elderly mother of a lady that they had met. She was called Kate Rich. This job didn't last long, as the family had noticed checks of their elderly relative being cashed, but as she was infirm, they knew it must have been fraud, so sent the pair away without going to the police. Powell began to miss home and often asked Lucas to return with her, and he refused. She was later noticed as being absent, but when asked about her whereabouts, Lucas told people that she had gone back home hitchhiking with a trucker. In June 1983, Lucas was picked up by a ranger by the name of Phil Ryan. He took Lucas in on charges of possessing a firearm which was not registered. When he was being questioned for this, Lucas opened up to the murders of 2 people. One was of the woman he worked for, Kate Rich, and the other was his young girlfriend, Frida Powell. To substantiate his claims, he led the police to the burial sites of both victims. Lucas was remanded in custody. Claims of mistreatment were made by Lucas. He had stated that other inmates were harming him, and he felt the only way out was to make another attempt at his life. So for his safety, he was transferred to Williamson County in Texas. He also made claims that the police had treated him badly prior to his confession of murder. He told of not being allowed to speak to an attorney. He was said to be stripped and left in a cold cell with no bedding. Claims also were made to the effect that he had made up confessions to the police so that he could get better treatment, and found the more he confessed, the better treatment he got. He told the police about a long career as a killer. He told them that he found young women hitchhiking, that he would stop and let them in his car. He would sexually assault them, then murder them by strangulation or shooting or even stabbing. He claimed Cindy was his first victim, then continued to murder for the next 17 years, along with his sidekick Otis. Many more murders were being confessed to, mostly without names of the victims. In fact, there were too many to count. A task force named the Lucas Task Force was set up to try and substantiate some of Lucas's wild claims. The force were able to clear over 200 murders, which were up to that day unsolved. The claims continued. He confessed to murders of unidentified women who had been found, and later DNA matched the victims. One was named as Michelle Busher, a girl identified as Caledonia Jane Doe, who later matched DNA to be Tammy Alexander. Another murder Lucas confessed to was that of Carol Cole from Louisiana. Journalists were very interested in this case and spent time discrediting Lucas's claims. They felt that he was given case files by the police to see, so then he had time and information to confess and have the claim substantiated. To the police, this was a way of clearing up many unsolved murders that had happened over the previous few years. A confession to the murder of Kirby Reeves was discounted, as there was evidence Lucas was on a different site at work that whole day. Then the murder of Elaine Tollett was discounted, as Lucas was in hospital at the time. There were murders that could be associated with Lucas, and he was in fact convicted of 11 first-degree murder charges. He was sentenced to the death penalty for these crimes. Although the case was very messy, the courts could account for at least 11 in his murder count, including Powell and Kate Rich. After a time, Lucas began recanting his confessions. He told police that he was not a serial killer. In 1998, Lucas's death date was nearing, and Governor of Texas, George W. Bush, overturned his death sentence and commuted it to life in prison instead, just 6 days before the date which was set to end Lucas's life. Henry Lee Lucas got the nicknames the Highway Killer and the Confession Killer. Then on the 13th of March 2001, Lucas died in prison of heart failure in Huntsville. He was aged 64. It will never be known exactly how many he killed. Although he did agree to the deaths of Kate Rich and Frida Powell, the rest of the confessions he recanted, although DNA could prove some murders to be his. He was sentenced to life in prison and is known widely as a serial killer, although Henry Lee Lucas himself denied this. Thank you so much for your continued support. Feel free to leave a comment, as we enjoy reading them. If you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories from Crime Busters.